Thank you. So, as Kazaya said, I am one of the technical writers here at In Rhythm, but I've actually been writing all my life. Even as a kid, I would try to write. I wrote some articles, sent them off to be published in magazines, and got very nice rejection slips back, which is very exciting when you're a child. But I grew up and I became a developer. And after several years of developing, I thought, boy, I really like writing. So I became a technical writer. And I've done that ever since. And through the years of doing this as a technical writer, I've picked up some skills and techniques, some tricks that can help you write like a professional. So what we're going to talk about is why it applies to everybody on this call. What are some of the reasons that people are hesitant to write? What our motivation should be when we write. Then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the tools that we use. And then finally, we'll talk about who it is that we're writing for. To begin with, everybody on this call writes, whether you realize it or not. We all write every day. Maybe it's just a Slack message or an email, or maybe you're filling out a ticket in Jira. But we use writing every day. The principles that I'm going to talk about are going to apply to every single one of these. If you're a manager, whether it's a project manager or you manage others, you write even more. You've got presentations to give, and evaluations to make, writing reports. So even if writing is not in your title, we all do write. Now, some people have expressed, maybe fear is too strong a word, but there's hesitation when it comes to writing. I've experienced this when I want to get somebody to send me some information that I need in order to build out requirements. And it's amazing how hard it is to get them to write it in an email. They want to call you on the phone. They want to tell it verbally. They don't want to write it down. Some people really do fear writing. Why? Well, sometimes they fear they're going to be judged for what they write. And I understand that, but you'd be amazed, really amazed, at how rare it is that you're actually being judged for the content of what you've put down. They really are trying to get the information out of what you've written. They're not really focused on the form. I mean, you have to be really egregiously, comically wrong for them to notice the actual writing that you do. Grammar Nazis, okay, we can ignore them. But everyone else, they really are not focused on that, because we're all professionals. We can put something together that will be decent enough. I'm sure we're not going to do any worse than this, right? This is a photo I took just 2 days ago of an official notice in a supermarket, and we're not going to be this bad. The whole world is like this now, where there are mistakes everywhere you look. I'm reading a mystery novel right now. The other night, I caught 2 typos within 1 paragraph. A professionally edited book has typos. And I found it in advertising copy. I've found typos everywhere, not this bad. Another fear that people have sometimes is the fear of not getting it perfect. They just want to polish it and polish it. Oh, don't look yet, it's not ready. Oh, please. But the secret to this is to realize you're never going to get it perfect. All you can do is get it better. So you write it down, you go back, you review it, you edit it, you make it a little better. That's good enough. Nobody ever gets it perfect. Not even Hemingway got it right the first time. And we're not trying to write works of art. We're trying to create functional pieces of information. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be usable. And some people are afraid of a blank page. They don't know where to begin. But the trick to this is simply asking yourself, what would the user have to do first? Write that down. Then what would they have to do? Write that down and just keep going like that. When you're done, you can edit it. You can maybe go up to the top and have a nice introductory paragraph. But when you don't know where to start, just ask yourself, what's the first step? Write that down and off you go. So we've talked about how we all write, and we've talked about some of the impediments that people feel toward writing. Now, the next step is to think about what our purpose in writing is, what our motivation should be. The word information has within it the word inform, and that's really what we're trying to do. If you are not sharing information with someone, if they're looking at it and they're not pulling out what you wanted to inform them of, you've wasted your time, you've wasted their time. Whereas if you inform them, you've accomplished what you set out to accomplish. It's really about trying to help others gain knowledge, to inform them. It's not just a checklist. If all you do is you say, well, okay, at this stage of the project, we have to have this kind of document or else we don't get approval. So I'll just throw something together. Well, your readers are going to notice that you just threw something together. Instead, you need to ask yourself, what would a user at this stage need to know? And you're not the user. Don't think about what you need to know. You know what you're talking about with this system. You have to think about someone who's not familiar with this. How would they navigate this? What would help them? When you do that, now you're beginning to inform them. Okay, so we've got our motivation in mind. Let's now talk about some of the tools of the trade. In the section I call clarity, brevity, simplicity. You might look at the word simplicity and say, really? We have to write simple things? Well, have you noticed how simple information has become? In the sense that people just don't like to read. And so you have to work with the audience we have today and yes, make it simple because we live in a simpler time. If you go back over the last 200 years and pull out the first sentence of famous novels, you will see that over time, the way we communicate has changed. Look at Hawthorne there in The House of the Seven Gables. The opening sentence, halfway down a by street of one of our New England towns stands a rusty wooden house with 7 acutely peaked gables facing toward various points of the compass and a huge clustered chimney in the midst. Compare that to the opening sentence of a 2020 bestseller. We live in simpler times. So can you imagine if Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote user manuals? Instead of the complicated sentence structure, just do something simple instead. Now, if you object and say, yes, but everything Hawthorne included there is critically important to include, so what do? Well, make it simple. Instead of one long, compound many comma sentence create 3 sentences. This is Company Co's trading system. It's been in use by our company for a number of years. Although it covers more functionality, it's primarily involved with trading. So now you've taken that and you simplified it for today's audiences. Because really what we're trying to do is make what we write inviting, not overwhelming. When a user sees a wall of text like this, unless he's living in 1880, where he probably thinks, oh, jolly good, this is just what I wanted. We have people today would take one look at this and say, I'm not going in there. I don't know where my information is. But if you take that same information and you structure it differently, now you've given the user an invitation into this page. Their eyes can focus on whatever they want to focus on. Maybe they look at the headings and they get an idea of what this page is trying to say. Maybe their eye is drawn toward the diagram at the bottom left and how the paragraph on the bottom right is meant to explain what's in that diagram. Maybe the blue in the upper right caught their attention. Now they've got the table of contents. Even the text itself is broken up with white space and headings and so forth. The point is, you're giving the reader an appealing invitation into the information through the use of heading and columns and panels and pictures. That's how you can take that information and make it structured in a way that today's audiences are happy to look at. And when you write, you should use the active voice. This is particularly true when dealing with developer language. Like if you're creating a Jira ticket, you should use the format noun, performs, verb. Don't do general things. What's in red there is what we should not do. Within the trade screen, a user desires an account balance. System gets the new balance and it is shown to the user. Well, how is it shown? Who's showing it? What is being shown? If instead you do noun, performs, verb format, like at the section in black at the bottom, you can see user clicks button, system calls procedure, UI refreshes amount in this field. That's how you get specific. It's how you explain to a developer exactly what system is involved, what subsystem is making the change, what the change is, where it gets recorded, and so forth. Using the active voice, explaining who's doing what, not the passive voice where something just happens and you don't explain what is happening. And all that we've talked about for text, a lot of it applies to diagramming as well. Again, we're trying to inform the viewer, so we want to make sure that the principles we followed apply here. And there are 3 things that you can keep in mind when it comes to diagramming that really will help the human viewer. Keep your line straight, group functional elements in a logical way, and use color to enhance meaning. And the reason these 3 techniques work is because your audience is made up of humans. And as humans, we respond in similar ways. If things don't line up, we start to get worried. Too many similar shapes all at once confuse us. And we respond well to color. So let's take a practical example of those principles in a diagram. And I'm going to show you an actual diagram that came to me at a company that no longer exists for a product that no longer exists, but it was real at the time. And this was a real diagram that was emailed to me by a colleague And the content of the email was simply, can you fix this? This is what I got. Now, I knew this colleague. I knew what she wanted. So I had to dive into this and look at this mess of a diagram where text is bleeding out of the boxes and lines are crossing each other unnecessarily, and there's crooked lines, and where does it end and where does it start and what's going on? And I sent her back this. The idea is that there was a structure to this complex system, but there were multiple entry points and multiple exit points and different pathways depending on what part of the subsystem was being involved. And so by logically moving things into their places so you can see the flow, color coding subsystems, putting a square box around and coloring the central part, you can now start to see the flow. Like if you're in the red section, you can very clearly see the path that you're supposed to follow and so forth. This, go ahead, find the red path. It's really much harder. And if you think it doesn't matter, that none of this is really that critically important, well, maybe it's not critically important, but it's harder for the user. You're making it harder for them to get informed. And it's user hostile to throw something like this at them. If you give them something like this, you've made it easier for them to grasp. So we've got our tools of the trade. We've got our motivation in mind. Now, finally, we want to think about who we're writing for. One thing you don't want to do as a professional writer is just say, well, I have my style. Everything's going to be in my style. Nobody cares about your style unless you're Hemingway. We're not trying to write a novel, right? We're trying to write functional information, and we're trying to gear it toward the person who asked for the information. For example, if you're writing to a document for a manager, they want to see high-level information. They want to know what's happening with the project and where are there blockages that need to be dealt with. Whereas a developer, they want those details. They need to know what the full URL is and where in Bitbucket they go to get things and what gets written to the database and what they have to write. Gear it toward your audience. If you're writing a user guide, well, now you're talking to the end user and you're talking about what they have to do. You're going to click this and then you'll see that, and then you'll click this, and it's a nice happy path of what will typically happen. On the other hand, if you're doing a run book, now you have to think in terms of someone in operations who's doing an overnight process and things might go wrong, what to do if things go wrong. Happy path no longer applies. You click the submit button and you'll see this error message, and you contact this person, but if it's after hours, you can call them and you write a ticket here, and it's just explaining it in great detail to someone who doesn't know the system as well, but has to support it. And if you're writing for traders at a trading desk, they won't read user manuals. So the best you can do is write a one-pager. Maybe laminate the one-pager so that they can throw it at their desk, spill coffee on it, and won't ruin it, but it'll be there on that one day when they need to figure out how to enter their time in the system, and they go step by step, read it, throw it back on the desk. You have to know your audience to know how to gear the information you're presenting to them. So we've talked about how writing matters to everyone. Even if you're just doing a Jira ticket or writing a Slack message, you should think about simplicity and clarity and brevity. You should write with the right motive, trying to inform people, not just do a checklist item. You should make your message as clear and as simple as it can be. That includes your diagrams. And then finally, gear it toward your audience. Give them what they need to see. And if you do all that, you will be writing like a professional.